Hi, Professor Joseph Drew here. I'm here to talk to you about the concept of distributive justice. It's extremely important. Most people don't know what it is. And sadly, we have very little distributive justice in our local government areas. So please watch this all the way through because there's some really important information. So what is distributive justice? It is exactly what it sounds like. It's being just, being fair, in terms of distributing the burdens of government upon everyone. What is the burden? It's our rates, or what should be called local government taxes. Now, to understand how distributive justice works in respect to local government taxes, you need to invoke a very important dictum from the economics corpus of economics literature. It's called the Pigovian dictum, which is that equal people should be treated equally by government unless they differ in some relevant respect. So we put these two concepts together, distributive justice and the Pigovian dictum. It tells us that we should apportion local government tax burdens, the rate of tax, not the actual tax bill, the rate of tax, equally unless the people differ in some important and relevant respect. So why is this relevant to local government? It's relevant because local government particularly often does not practice distributive justice. We have various subcategories where different people are being charged a different rate in the dollar tax on their land, but there is no good relevance difference between the people. So this is a particular problem for local government. We don't see it so much at the state and federal government level. It's something we need to have a very long conversation about, and we also need some legislative changes to make it happen. So to understand the issue properly, you need to understand what we're trying to do in local government when we charge rates, which the proper word for it is taxes. Now we must remember that it is a tax, not a fee for service. It's a tax, just like your federal government tax and your state government tax. It's got nothing to do with the services you actually receive. So, for instance, I pay the same PAYG tax rate as anyone else that earns my income anywhere in Australia. Yet, it's a fact that in Moombi, which is north of Tamworth, I receive absolutely zero federal government services. Now, do I expect to pay a different level of tax because I don't receive any services? No, I do not, because it is not a fee for service. It is a tax. And this is the #1 misconception in local government. People forget that rates are actually a tax. We should call it a tax because it is a tax. It's got nothing to do with the services you receive. Another example, GST is a tax. I get absolutely no state government services in Moombi either. Does that mean that when I go to Woolies and buy a chocolate bar, I should pay 1% GST instead of 10% GST? Of course not. It's a tax. It's my moral obligation as a member of a society to pay that tax irrespective of the services I receive. Now, when we're talking about local government tax, we're talking about land tax, and it's a very moral tax, so much more moral and good. I have a video on this than the other taxes that we have in Australia. Most of our other taxes are actually bad taxes from an economic and moral perspective. So what we're trying to do with local government taxes, we're trying to capture the unearned wealth. Now there's a famous natural law philosopher, Henry George, and he was the biggest advocate for this. He basically pointed out, if you buy a block of land and you do nothing with it, probably in 10 years time, it'll double in value. That's money you've earned by doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. You've put no effort into it and you've got all this unearned wealth. And Henry George said, well, if you're going to tax anything, you have to have taxes that fund government. If you want to do it in a moral way, you should tax that unearned wealth because that'll do the least damage to the economy. That'll do the least damage to people. You know, compare that to PAYG tax. A lot of people won't work overtime and do extra work because the taxman will take 40% of what they earn. It's not worth the effort. It affects people's behaviour. It makes us less productive, and then as a nation, it's holding us back. The land taxes that local government use are so much more superior, particularly unimproved land tax, because it's not altering people's decision making. You're not holding back your labour or your work or your effort because that's not being taxed. What's being taxed is the unearned wealth you've accrued, mainly as a result of things that other people in the community has done. So a local government tax is a moral tax. We shouldn't feel bad about taking the local government tax off residents because it's money they haven't earned, and it is money that the community's earned, and that local government tax money that we take is invested into the community and allows those people to make even more unearned wealth. Now, when you think about it, the amount of the unearned wealth we pay out in local government's tax is minuscule. So my unearned wealth last tax valuation, my land went up $40,000. In that period of time, I paid $3,000 or $4,000 in tax, like 1/10 of my unearned wealth. I wish I could pay 1/10 of my earned wealth, my PAYG tax, in federal tax. I'd be very, very happy, and I'd be a very wealthy man. So do not feel bad about levying a local government tax. It is a good tax, it's a moral tax, and it's the right thing to do. Now, there's one more complication we need to be aware of with respect to distributive justice. Now, essentially, and this is not precisely, it will depend on your local government area, but essentially, if we were strictly observing distributive justice, the tax rate in the dollar on the unearned wealth embodied in our land would be exactly the same for every single person, every single category, except for this complication. And what is this complication? It's tax exporting. Now, landlords of rental properties, businesses, and farm businesses, because a farm is a business, it is a commercial business, they all get to deduct as an expense their rates on their tax returns. As a result, the actual burden they bear on their local government taxes, on their local government rates, is lower than someone who doesn't get to deduct their rates. So a normal person that lives in their own house doesn't get to include their rates as a tax deduction. However, if I owned a house and rented it out to someone, I do get to deduct that tax as a tax deduction on my federal government taxes. Now, if we want distributive justice, if we want that burden to be apportioned fairly, the local government taxes paid by people who can claim it as a tax deduction on their federal government taxes, i.e. do tax exporting, should be at a higher rate so that after we take into account the deductions that they receive, they end up paying out of their own pocket the same as everyone else in the community. It is an additional complication to do it under the legislation at present for landlords. It doesn't appear that it's possible to do it. We would need legislative changes. For businesses and farm businesses, under current legislation, it is possible because they are different categories, and the rate that they pay could be higher to account for the tax exporting that they are usually able to do. So, distributive justice is important. You know, government, at the end of the day, it's a moral enterprise. If it's not a moral enterprise, if we're not making all our decisions for moral reasons, we are no better than a protection racket like the mafia. It has to be a moral enterprise. If it's going to be a moral enterprise, we need to generate our revenue in a moral way. I cover this in great detail in my recent book, Saving Local Government, that was written particularly for councillors and mayors. So if you can get your hands on a copy of it, please do so. Most people in Australia believe in a fair go, but when it comes to local government rates, often we are not giving people a fair go. Some people, particularly in councils where they have lots of subcategories, like where I live, some people are paying 2, 3, 4 times more rate in the dollar on their unearned wealth embodied in their land than other people, and I cannot see any good reason for why that is so. Failure to observe distributive justice tends to hurt the least wealthy most, our most vulnerable in our population. So we need to address this issue. Now, unfortunately, because we've got big justice problems in our local government tax system, it would require large changes to get anywhere near distributive justice again. And unfortunately, human nature being what it is, if you change it, if you ask people who have had a considerable discount on their local government taxes over many years to start suddenly paying the same as other people, they will complain. That is human nature. They won't remember and think about the fact that for the last 20, 30, 40 years they've had this huge discount and it's not fair. They will complain. The beneficiaries, sadly, economic theory tells us this too, the beneficiaries, sadly, will probably not come up and thank you for it. So you would have to be quite courageous to look at your tax system and remodel it. But if you believe, like me, that government is a moral endeavour, that we need to get our funds morally and spend them morally, because if we don't, we're just a very large protection racket, well, then you're going to have the courage and do this. I guess you'd phase it in over many years. It's a difficult challenge, but I think for a nation that believes in a fair go, it's a challenge that we as local government people need to accept and take on. Look, I have very little doubt that this video has given you much food for thought. You probably never thought about local government taxes from a moral perspective before, but it's incredibly important. We have to treat people fairly. Now, all my videos are there to stimulate conversation, so please tell me what you think of them. But more importantly, there's two things I really need you to do. One is subscribe if you haven't done it, and give me the thumbs up. It's a little bit of feedback. Makes me feel good when I see it. You know, I do put effort and a lot of my own time into these videos. But also send it around to others. We need everyone in local government talking about these issues, knowing about these issues. I need to get these subscriber numbers up to justify to my employer why I spend their resources. It's my time, but it's their computer and their video camera doing these videos for you. And if you want me to keep doing them, well, I'm just going to need your help. It's as simple as that. Look, thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.